Welcome back. As you probably remember, earlier this year, I made the world's most accurate prediction on Tesla shareholder votes on Elon's compensation package. Now we want to take it to the next level and predict the outcome of the US election, Trump versus Harris. Before we jump in and look at the quantitative models that allow us to do that prediction and make that prediction accurately, let me first elaborate why it's so important in my line of work. First of all, my job, together with you, is to define the target state, which is the future of our civilization, the state we want to engineer this civilization into so we live in a better world. In order to make these target state predictions and designs, we need to be the best in the world in predicting and understanding reality. And to do that, we need to keep our minds and models sharp. And nothing is better than a high profile public event that everyone talks about it, like the US election, because it puts us into the spotlight and it forces us to really use our brains and exposes us to be either right or wrong. So I love that. Let's go and jump into it. First of all, how do you predict an election? How do you predict something so big and important that is all over the place right now? Well, there's the first way to not do it. And that's how everyone right now approaches it. If you make this an emotional debate where you have your convictions, you think Trump is terrible or Kamala is terrible, and you live in these bubbles, you lose all ability to make objective predictions. Look at what the media is saying right now about Trump. They're calling him Hitler. They're saying the rally in New York was like this fascist rally, which is completely disconnected from any sort of reality. But if you live in the liberal bubble, you will never know that. You will be affirmed in your crazy ideas about what Trump is from all directions and from all sides. Now, if you're pro-Trump, you will agree with me. But if you're pro-Kamala, you will have a very different perspective. You will see the same thing on the other side. At the Trump rally, there was someone who called Kamala Harris the Antichrist. And so both sides use complete hyperbole and crazy terms to describe the other guy or girl in this case. And the problem is we live in these media bubbles that just reaffirm our perspective. So even though all of us and each of us thinks we can make these informed and intelligent, judgment calls on people, right? We think we are smart, we can judge Trump, we can judge Kamala. Believe me, in this specific case, we can't. Even I, who think, is very good with people and judging them, I have lost faith in my own ability to tell you, is Kamala really as stupid as the right says and as incompetent? Is Trump really as crazy as the left says? I don't know. It's too distorted, the whole situation. So we need to get out of these bubbles and look at something we can trust. And the one thing we can trust, at least I can trust, are numbers. So I want to use in this prediction a quantitative model that uses historic polling and polling bias and corrects for it, and polymarket and some other quantitative metrics to understand what's going on. So let's forget everything you believe. Let's forget everything you think you are sure of about Trump or Kamala, and jump right into a cold-blooded quantitative perspective that tells us what is going on. The way I approach this model is very simple. You have here the swing states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and the popular vote just for good measure. And what I'm doing here is I look at November 2nd, 2020, which was the results, Trump versus Biden, the polling results, Trump versus Biden, in the last poll before the actual election. And what you see here are basically the actual election results per swing state and popular vote. So we can now compare the polling results with the actual election results and get the Trump polling error effect. I use the Trump polling error effect. You could also use the Democratic error effect. So this error effect basically tells us, if we subtract this from this, what is the actual effect here? How much more does Trump actually get than the polls say? And For example, in Arizona, the poll said Trump is behind 2.2%, but he was only behind 0.3%, which means he has a 1.9% Trump polling error effect in his favor in 2020. And I did something very simple here to see where we are right now, and how these error effects would translate into, the actual results in this election. So the important thing is, when you look at our current polling, which is very interesting, the current polling you see here, this is from October 28th, as good as it gets, right? And what you see is, the first thing you see is Trump is ahead in the official polling in all swing states and even in the popular vote. That would be very concerning if you're a Democrat, right? Because that is the exact opposite of what happened in 2020. In 2020, Trump was behind on all metrics, right? In all swing states and the popular vote, by 8%, by the way, in the popular vote. That's crazy. So now he is actually ahead in all of them. And leaving aside all the polling error effects, just that should be an enormous warning signal. And most people are not aware of this comparison. We will talk a little later about election rigging and what was going on in 2020 and what people think, and if that's actually built into these models. But just this 2024 polling, last polling before election, versus that last polling before election, tells you there is an enormous shift, at least in the polls. Now, the problem is for Democrats that even on top of that big shift on the face value of the polls, we see the error effect being in Trump's favor, massively in Trump's favor, in most instances, with the exception of Georgia, where actually Biden had a bias against him. So what I did here is very simple. I'm looking at how does this affect these polls and the polling errors, the projection for the election. And here's the total summary of swing state votes Trump would actually get from the swing states. If we assume in this first example here, what would 100% of the same error effect do to the results? So let's assume the polling error effect of 2020 would stay the exact same, 100% in 2024. If that happens, you see it's a total blowout for Trump, and he gets 93 of the swing votes, reaching a total of 312 electoral votes. You know he needs 270 to win, so 312 is pretty much close to a landslide. That happens if it's 100%. Now, if the polling error goes down to 50%, so the polling error we saw in 2020 goes down to only 50% of what it was in 2020 across all of these, he still gets 312 votes. It's actually looking very similar. But you see he's a little less advantageous for him, right? So instead of 3.4% winning Arizona, he wins it with 2.45%. If the polling errors go down to 0%, right, he still gets 312 votes. That's very interesting. He remains at 312. Of course, what I did now is how safe are these 312 votes that Trump will get? Well, if we have a polling error 100% of what we had historically in 2020, he will be very solid. All the white ones here are pretty solid. The way I did that is I mark it with light yellow if it's a less than 1% advantage, and if it's less than 0.25% advantage, I make it dark yellow. So that is an indication how much at risk Trump's advantage is. So here it's basically not at risk, right? The worst thing that can happen in this instance, or not the worst thing, but the only less than 1% advantage he has here is Georgia. If you delete this, you see he wins with 296 votes if Georgia would actually go to Harris, despite him having 0.68%, 0.67% projected advantage. Same for the 50% polling error. Now, let's assume all the pollsters wisened up to their mistakes in 2016 and 2020, which is also why it's unlikely they wisened up to it, because they did it twice. So the improvement from 2020 over 2016 is very marginal or non-existent. the pollsters got it nearly as wrong as they got it in 2016, which makes me not very confident they corrected that significantly in 2024, which means the 0% bias is not likely. It's the same pollsters, the same outlets that did it twice. Why would they not commit the same mistake 3 times if they did it twice? But let's assume they correct all their errors. What we see here is at a 0% error, of course, Trump would be more at risk in 3 states, or in 2, in Michigan and in Wisconsin. He would be under 0.25% advantage. So let's say this is too critical for us. Let's take him out here and say Harris wins this, or could easily win Michigan and easily win Wisconsin. And then Trump ends up with 287 electoral votes, which still makes him the president. So here you see the range I'm looking at. I think 312 is likely based on this model. The downside is 287. Upside above 312 is also not that likely for Trump. It's possible, but not likely. I think 312 would be the bet I'm making. 287 would be the lower end of the reasonable bet. Of course, you never know and everything can happen. But here is my model. You see how this, looks like. And, I think this is a maybe you think, well, this is kind of a simple model, but it's also cutting through all the noise. It's like, what facts do we actually have? We have these polls, Real Clear Politics average, by the way. These are all the polls combined. And we have the comparison and we have the bias. That's a first principle look at the actual numbers that we see. Can look at some other trends and things like that, but that makes it too complicated. I think this is the model. This is my best bet. Now, in order to add one more dimension to this, I want to also take a quick look at Polymarket. Maybe you guys know what Polymarket is. Polymarket are betting markets. Most people don't really understand what that means, like statistically and probability-wise. A betting market is basically a way for people to bet on the outcome, a binary bet. I'm actually having some bets because you can imagine what I'm betting on. I can go into some details here, but the betting markets, you can basically buy puts or calls on Trump or Kamala. And what you see right now is Polymarket predicts Donald Trump win at 66.3%. I actually listened to some very smart pundits like Breaking Points, Crystal and Sagar. It's interesting to me how little they actually understand the math behind this. They said Polymarket is, Crystal said Polymarket is rigged because it's way too high. No, it's not too high. It's actually too low in my opinion, because this is not a poll. This is not saying 66% of Americans will vote for Trump. This is a binary bet if Trump will get more than 50%. So you buy this for 66.3 cents right now. You can buy a Trump call and the payout is $1. So you either get 0 if Trump doesn't win, or you get $1 if he wins. So you can invest 66.3 cents and get $1 payout, or 66 million if you want and get 100 million payout, whatever, however many you want to buy. And Kamala's at 33.8%. More importantly, we can look at the trend lines here, and we see when Kamala took over from Biden. So Biden had a little problem here, as you can see. But at the peak, Trump was at 71% when they were in disarray, the Democrats. Kamala took over. There was this Kamala, happy time. And then Kamala led for a little bit, September, October. And then end of October, when people got to know Kamala a little bit better, she did some interviews, and Elon Musk, of course, jumped into the whole fold, and RFK, some 2 very important guys, in my opinion, for Trump. You see what happens here. It's a massive divergence. So the betting markets massively start betting on Trump. And why Polymarket is important, besides confirming my model a little bit, it also shows a trend. And I think that's very important. The trend is clearly on Trump's tailwind for Trump, which is important in politics. You have the momentum, and that's also a subjective thing. You could argue, even though we have to be cautious. So from a quantitative level, we also see the betting markets momentum here. Last comment on the betting markets, by the way, or 2 more comments. One comment is, if you want to buy things. What I think is actually weird about betting markets is that the yes call option on Trump should have a significant like risk, not premium, the opposite of premium, deduction over the no Kamala, right? So what you see is they're pretty much identical. And I think that's a market inefficiency. That's an error. Because it is by definition, it's much more likely that Kamala doesn't become president than that Trump becomes president. Okay, let me repeat this. It is more likely Kamala does not become president than that Trump becomes president. But their price is the same right now. Kamala no is priced at 66.3 cents, and Trump is priced at 66.3 cents, yes, versus Kamala no. When you think about it, Kamala losing doesn't mean Trump is winning. Trump could, whatever, have a health problem, drop out, whatever happens. People could vote for him, and then he could drop out before he becomes president. Because the decisive thing is January 6th, is he actually voted president? Or, for example, Trump could drop out before the race, and J.D. Vance takes over and J.D. Vance wins. So in all the possible scenarios, by definition, mathematically, Kamala losing is always, I think, significantly more likely than Trump winning. So they shouldn't be priced the same. And the same is true vice versa. So you, in my opinion, you should always buy the no and not the yes. So if you think Trump wins, buy Kamala no. If you think Kamala wins, buy Trump no, unless there's a significant difference in price, which it is not. Then the last comment here is Crystal. She's a little liberal of Breaking Points, my favorite show, by the way. Check it out on YouTube. They're pretty neutral and balanced. They have one more conservative, is Sager, and then they have Crystal, who's more liberal. And she totally thinks Polymarket is rigged to make Trump win by some crypto bros. I think that's silly. You don't rig markets like that. People are not willing to spend billions of dollars. This is aggregate, over $1 billion in this market to rig something. People put the money where their mouth is. That's why that is why betting markets are actually a very good tool. And you also see that other betting markets like interactive brokers have similar numbers. I think there is significant arbitrage. I think Polymarket is more pro-Trump than the interactive brokers. I think interactive brokers right now is at 62% and not 66 or 63%. That's a weird delta. But they tell us a lot of things. So I hope these two perspectives were helpful. And final comment to understand what's going on. One of the main big topics in the election, especially on the right, is that the election of 2020 was rigged. And that Trump needs to win this election with a very significant margin because it needs to be too big to rig. That is the narrative on the right. Now, what do we make of that? Could it be that my model is accurate and Trump would win at 312, but then the Democrats use all their secret tools to rig the election so he loses? Well, what's very important, regardless of what you think, because people are very emotional about rigging. One side says it's total treason to even talk about it. The other side says, obviously, it's rigged for many reasons. And the truth, by definition, is in the middle. Of course, some things are always rigged in every election. Of course, the 2020 election is probably more rigged than any other because of the pandemic and the opportunities to rig it. Does it mean it was rigged in a way, that actually made Trump lose when he wouldn't lose? Who knows? Doesn't matter. The rigging piece is actually contained in my model, because when you look at the polling showed that Biden was winning massively, and then Trump performed much better than the polls said. So the only argument it was rigged was the ballots coming in at the last minute. In Pennsylvania, for example, you see this big leap overnight, which is a little dubious. But if you take a step back, does it really matter? Not really, if my analysis is correct, because Biden was heavily favored in the polls and he just won. He was favored in the polls and he won. So if you take a bunch of steps back, that's not too crazy. What's crazy is how much the polls were actually wrong, underestimating Trump, but it was still not enough to make him win. Now the polls look massively in favor of Trump, or at least significantly across all swing states and the popular vote. And if you overlay the bias, we get to these results. So what's the final verdict? Here's my verdict. If there would be a specific number of electoral votes I would be betting on, it's 312 for Trump. Based on the analysis, I would say on the lower end in the reasonable, range of outcomes, it's 287 for Trump. I think above 312, it is unlikely, but always possible. And below 287, it's more likely than above 312. But I think the reasonable betting window is 287 to 312. And if I had to bet on a specific number, I would bet on 312. So there you have it. I know this is a risky projection because everyone can see the outcome next week. I'm doing that mostly to share my thinking and my models. If I'm wrong, we will see that I was wrong. If I'm right, we'll see that I was right. And we can always then go into analysis why, what happened. So I hope this was helpful. We see you on the other side. And I hope the election goes peacefully. That's the most important thing. And I hope, no one is too disappointed with the outcomes. And of course, I hope my prediction is accurate. See you soon.